Hi, this is Marcus Mihelcic, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about the changing landscape of drug tests in the pre-hire process. For starters, I want to talk about the philosophy of drug testing, how kind of this came to be, why those practices are still very prevalent today. I also want to dive into the political considerations. Of course, you can't talk about pre-hire drug testing without discussing the origins in the 1960s and 70s and the so-called war on drugs. And I also want to talk about some of the best practices of the past when it comes to pre-hire drug testing, and also what the future of that's going to look like as well. And then lastly, we'll kind of conclude with some of the considerations for the company. So the philosophy of drug testing comes from kind of this place of care where the idea is we're going to do a pre-hire drug test because it's ultimately going to determine if an employee could put the company at risk. The company is all about promoting a safe workplace, free of potential accidents, or even violence caused by drug abuse. So again, looking from the corporate perspective, that was kind of the underpinning of, why even do a drug test to begin with? Well, the idea boils down to, let's, separate the good seeds from the bad ones, and we're going to go from there. I also want to talk about the political considerations here, this so-called war on drugs. Again, this started in the 1960s, and drugs were kind of symbolic for this youthful rebellion, this kind of us versus them mentality in a multi-generational workforce. And in 1971, President Nixon declared this war on drugs, and out of that was born all kinds of federal drug control agencies. Knowing that there's a pre-hire drug test could incentivize a prospective employer from ultimately engaging in those activities with drug use. Looking back to the best practices of what we've kind of seen before and what's still out there today, the HR leader would initiate this kind of drug test, usually through an email, and then the employee could go to a MedExpress or a clinic of their choice, and they'd do the drug test. So while drug testing may make it a little more difficult to find employees, the philosophy is that the positive impact on the workplace ultimately makes it kind of worthwhile. But because things are changing, opinions are changing, and the generation that has entered the workforce is also changing, there's this idea of a workforce that is so, antiquated in that it's this kind of middle class, working man from the Midwest who's got a family to provide for. And ultimately, that's not really what it looks like today out there. The working class is men and women of color. It's millennials. The working class is fundamentally looking different, and this is not the era of Nixon and Reagan anymore, where these ideas about drugs are rather antiquated. So, as we're looking to the best practices of the future, it's kind of looking like drug testing policies, especially for marijuana use, are no longer in step with the realities of today's workforce. We're facing an aging workforce, low unemployment, and a strong economy. So HR professionals need to find ways to remove these barriers to fill those essential positions. And one of the best ways to remove the barriers to attract talent is through getting rid of this pre-screen drug test. Or at least moving forward with the pre-screen, but not testing for drugs that are popular, like marijuana. CBD products, for example, are flying off the shelves in states like Pennsylvania, and some CBD products do have trace amounts of THC, so when you go in for a drug test, there is a very real possibility that if you had a CBD product like gummies or oil or pills, that could show up in the specimen. So taking that into consideration too, we don't want to disqualify people who are using products legally. We are facing two fundamentally different philosophies. The one that says, yes, we need drug tests in the pre-screen stage because it's going to weed out the bad candidates who are going to come to work and they're going to use drugs and they're going to hurt people and so on and so forth. And you have this new idea here where, drugs like marijuana you could get in pharmacies, you could get in retail stores. Drug testing policies, especially for marijuana use, are no longer in step with the realities of today's workforce. While pot is still classified as an illegal substance under federal law, state governments continue to move forward legalizing or at least decriminalizing it. In fact, the state of Maine, for example, prohibits employers from testing for marijuana at the pre-employment stage and from discharging any employee for an initial positive drug test. I think another reason employers are increasingly reluctant to test for drugs is the potential legal challenges that could come with screening, including from employees claiming that organizations didn't follow the proper notice. Those claims could involve disability, race, or age discrimination, or even invasion of privacy. Many employers don't see a return on investment when they weigh the cost of random drug testing as well as the pre-employment drug testing. In conclusion, to avoid these kinds of problems, more managers are going to need to focus solely on job performance and shy away from optional drug screens.